adding your decorative techniques to this piece. Okay, so we're gonna go over piercing, incising, stamping, slip trailing, and relief. And we'll also go over how to make slip because you're gonna need that. Okay, so everyone should have a little container like this. I've got a little bit of water in here. Everyone also should have an extra bag of clay that you will use for making slip and adding relief and like making patches and so on, because you kind of need a little extra clay. So I'm going to take a little bit of clay here, just a small amount here. You don't really need a lot because you kind of want it to be made mostly of water. I'm going to add just a little bit more because my cup of water was like about a third full. It's brought up to about halfway now. And then I'm gonna go ahead and mix it in. So you can mix it with your finger, or maybe the fork will probably work really well with mixing this. I'm gonna smush it in place here and really kind of break down the clay. If you want, you can make this ahead of time and just let it sit in the clay, or let the clay sit in the water so that it becomes very slurry like. So you're looking for something that's maybe the consistency of sour cream, where it's a little thick and it's a little bit runny, or the consistency of yogurt. Okay, so this is starting to kind of break down. I'm gonna let it sit in there further, and maybe I'll take my brush here and really kind of stir it around. But the water is going to start to break down the clay, and then it'll be really good for us to use once it's ready to go. Okay, so that's going to sit in there and dissolve, break down further. It's a little murky and watery right now. Okay, so let's talk about our piece. So where we had left off, we had this very soft type of clay, and we wanted to let it air dry. Here I have a piece that has been air drying for a while. It's nice and leather hard. Look at it. There are even areas where it's gotten, kind of white and ashy. You can see it in here. The color of it has changed. You don't want to go any more beyond this, because like this clay here, like I can still remove parts of it. I can still carve into it. But beyond this point, if everything starts turning this white kind of color, it's going to be really difficult for you to add attachments and to do other things with it. And then when you're trying to carve into the clay, it's going to get really dusty, and you don't want to be inhaling any of that dust. Okay, it's going to create a really large mess. So make sure it doesn't get to this point here. This part here where it's kind of dark still, that's perfect for adding clay onto, okay, or for carving. If you get to this point here, what you need to do to bring moisture back into your piece is just take a piece of paper towel, get it wet, and then wrap a piece around it, and then wrap it up really well in the plastic bag, and that'll bring some moisture back into your clay piece. Okay, you do want to keep an eye on it. You don't want it to be sitting with paper towel on it for too long, because sometimes what will happen is all the moisture will go into the clay body, and then the paper towel will become very dry, but paper towel is meant to absorb moisture, and then the paper towel will eventually start taking or drawing out some of that moisture from the clay. Okay, so it can have like a reverse effect, which we don't want. Okay, so just keep an eye on it. Add the wet paper towel, and if you start noticing that the wet paper towel is starting to become dry, take the wet paper towel off it, remoisten it, put it back on if you still need it to. If you still need more water in your piece, if it's starting to become too dry. Okay, so that's one technique that you can use to keep your clay workable for you. Okay, all right, so we've made some slip. The first technique that I am going to show you actually is stamping. I don't think many of you guys will be using stamping because it requires that you use stamps. And stamps can be made out of, any stamping kind of material that you may have laying around, anything pretty much a texture that you can impress into the clay. Okay, so it can be man-made stamps, but it can also be just anything with texture on it. Okay, so I've got this here, and I'm actually going to grab my clay that is still kind of soft here, because stamping really works best on soft clay. Okay, so if I just kind of roll this on there, you can see it's left behind, this kind of texture, okay? Okay, so it's left some texture behind. You can use this here to kind of impress marks on here. Okay. All right. But it works best on here when the clay is still slightly soft. If the clay has become very, very dry, it's not going to work as well. Like, notice how like trying to impress that the clay is too dry, it won't take any of the markings there, especially if it's very fine. You can try with these other pieces to make little markings in there, but you just don't quite get the effect if the clay is still a little more moist. Okay, so a little hard. Stamping, not so great. A lot of times it can be difficult to achieve a certain effect if you're going for a certain look. Okay, you would need very specific stamps. Okay, so that's stamping. The other technique we're going to cover is piercing. So piercing is when you're actually piercing a hole into your piece. Some of you guys do have that as your design. And for piercing, you can use, a fettling knife. However, since we didn't go home with fettling knife, you can use this plastic knife here, okay? So I'm going to pick a spot here. And before I actually start carving into, I'm just going to mark what I'm going to cut out. I'm just going to do, let's see here. Let's just cut out a hole in this mark here that I had before. So I'm going to just outline it with this first, and then maybe I'll go ahead and poke a hole in here because my clay is pretty hard. So I probably shouldn't have allowed this to dry out too much, because now it's gonna be difficult for me to work with. So don't let your pieces dry out overly much. Okay, so I'm just gonna drill this. Very carefully drill this in, and hopefully my piece doesn't break. But I just want to be able to get that plastic knife in there. If you guys are in the studio, I would just have you do this with the friendly knife, and it would work so much better. You know what? I'm just gonna grab a friendly knife. Okay, so this here is a felling knife. This is gonna go in. Oh, did you hear that? Like released air. Okay, so I've got my hole. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and cut it out. I'm gonna remove some of this first, okay? So these are your ribbon tools. They will have like a slim wire on each end. It's really great for removing clay, okay? So carving into the clay, it's really great, but also for piercing the clay. So it's gonna work this in here. Okay. We're gonna use this almost like a sawing kind of motion. And you know what? This isn't so great maybe for softer clay. I think I'm gonna go ahead and continue removing it with the ribbon tool. Okay, so you can hold it and start carving into the clay. All right, guys. So I have my piece cut out here, my circle that's been cut out here. Okay. And I also left behind this big old pile of clay. Okay. So it can get pretty messy. If you have a bucket of some sort, ideally an ice cream bucket would work really, really well in this case. It makes for easy cleanup. You can just simply sweep everything into the ice cream bucket so it doesn't end up all over your floors and all over the table or up in the air. And this clay here, we are going to keep, okay? We are going to add water to it and it'll break down the clay and then we can reuse it again, okay? You can also use it for making slip. It makes fantastic slip with a little bit of water. So hang on to that. Don't throw it away. Okay, so keep that there. All right, so I've got my hold here. It's a little rough in some areas, but I can simply add some moisture or slip onto it and just kind of smooth things out with my finger, okay, if I need to. Just kind of refine it further. All right, so that's piercing. It's actually cutting out shapes or holes into your piece, if that's your design, and then where you can actually see the interior of your nesting doll figure here. Okay, so that's piercing. You may or may not have this as part of your design. Okay. The next thing I'm going to show you is incising. Okay, and incising is just simply carving into the clay. So a great tool for that is this ribbon tool here. You guys will have a double-ended one. Mine, unfortunately, is busted on the other end. So I'm just going to use this one here. I like using like the corners of it to remove clay. You can kind of draw it, use it almost like a pencil, a drawing tool. You can kind of carefully, remove clay that way. So you can tell that my clay here is a little bit on the dry side because the movements or the carving of the clay doesn't want to be as smooth, okay? This is a great tool for removing design. Like it doesn't really want to move that well. So it's a little trickier. You need more control. You need your hands to be steadier. Okay. Another really great tool for carving designs into is the cuticle tool here. You can use either end. Before I used the tip to kind of draw out my circle so I could cut it out. But either end would work for removing clay or adding details to the clay. So if I wanted to go in and add some finer details, I can use the pencil part of this. The tip is ruined, so I'll use this side over here. Oh my god. Okay, see how that kind of easily carves into the clay here. And it's going to give you a much finer marks or finer lines for your design. Okay, so there we go. That's incising. Oops. There we go. All right. The next technique I'm going to show you is relief. Okay, relief is carving into and like not necessarily carving into, although that can be part of relief too, but building the clay up so it looks more three-dimensional. So my piece is pretty leather hard here, so any attachments I make at this point, I am going to make sure that I score things really well, okay? So I'm going to grab some of this extra clay here, and say if I wanted to just lay something on top of it and build off of that, I'm going to kind of work the clay a little bit, compress it, okay? So say if I wanted to add, I don't know, like a feather on here, I'm going to go ahead and cut it out. And add a feather, a leaf. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this out. I'm going to shape it with my fingers a little. Maybe I'll do a little bit of detailing. Okay, so getting a little bit of a leaf here. Okay, now I'm ready to attach it. Maybe I'll attach it over on this side over here. But before I can add it on, I want to make sure I score it really well. So I'm going to mark where I want it to be. I'm just going to very lightly score. Score the piece on here. It's hard to do when I'm holding it up. Okay, can't even see it. But it's going to be about right here. So I'm going to roughen this part here up pretty good. Just going to cross hatch it. Okay. You can see the cross hatch marks there. Okay. Then I'm going to do the same with my leaf here that's got a little bit of clay on it. Flip it over. I'm going to cross hatch this area here too. So I'm going to score both areas. Then I'm going to take some of my slip here and apply it. And here and here. And I'm going to go back over this area because it's pretty hard. I just want to make sure it's going to stick and it's not going to fall off. So adding the moisture into it is going to make sure that your piece is going to stay in place. Okay, now the slip is going to act as a glue. You're going to hold it in place. And I'm just going to use this, just kind of clean up the edges here a little bit. And the leaf itself looks a little rough. Just going to smooth it out with the paintbrush. Okay. So this is relief. Adding clay on to the surface, and if I wanted to add more and build on top of that, I certainly can. Okay, to create like a three-dimensional effect. There we go. Okay. All right. So the next technique I'm going to show you is slipping or slip trailing. Okay. If you have access to a squeezy bottle, you can use slip to draw with. If you don't have access to a little squeezy bottle, you can just simply use slip as kind of like frosting or decoration, okay? So if I wanted to add some texture onto my piece, You see how it's creating kind of like a raised effect on there? You can add texture onto your piece. Okay, and then you can even, if you wanted to, you could smooth things out further or clean up your edges with another tool. Okay. You can create like a little piping bag with this and then use it almost like um, frosting. There you go. A little bit of texture there. It'll harden, it'll dry like that, and then it'll remain, kind of lumpy and bumpy, okay, in that area. All right, guys, so we've gone through making slip, we've gone through piercing a hole, we've gone through incising. We've also talked about stamping and the type of surface you want or the type of clay stage you want in order to get a really great stamp texture on here. We talked about slip trailing or decorating with slip. And then we also talked about relief or adding clay onto your piece and creating or making it three-dimensional. So we've talked about all of our different types of techniques. And now it's your turn. Now you have to kind of figure out what technique you need and what technique you'll be using for your piece to kind of finish it off. Okay. So I have over here, I'm going to walk away here. Maybe I'll bring you along with me. I have over here my decorating, my piece over here. I don't know if I can, I'm not sure I can zoom in here. But you can kind of see my piece has kind of changed a little bit from our demonstration in class. I'm going with hopeful, and on the surface I have paper cranes that I will be using a combination of incising and relief on to create the effects. So I'll be doing that with like my actual piece, and in class you can kind of follow along as you are working on your own piece. We're looking to finalize these and by the end of the week. Okay, so stay tuned for how things are going to come together. I hope you continue to work on your piece in the meantime. And I also hope you guys are being safe, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.